Okay, so I was saying that we've got some other guests afterwards, and that's why we need now to make up a bit here, clean a bit the things, my cards from the other session. If I lose them, I cannot talk. I wrote them because I cannot talk if I don't have this. No, just joking. So we need to kind of tidy up the whole thing, because we've got another session that you should stay here. Some people moving. I hope you're only going to the restroom, because there are amazing people coming here. For example, you'll be able to listen to someone who's been recently elected as the mayor of Medellin. You will hear someone that I feel like it's super interesting to listen to because of the connection with city governance, like Jeff Merritt. He was leading the digital transformation of the city of New York, and now he's leading all these huge changes at the smart cities for the World Economic Forum. We also have Emilia Saiz, and she's from United Cities and Local Governments. She's the Secretary General, and also a part that it's also necessary, which is listening to the companies, to the private companies, because this is something that we will debate. I'll come over here and I'll let these people to work a bit on this. But the private companies, which is the role of the private companies? Is this something that we can make alone, public administrations, cities, or we also need private companies to join this transformation? Well, Richard Budel from Huawei is going to be also with us discussing this. We've got lots of things to talk. I've been discussing some of the things with Jeff and with Richard previously, and it was interesting because they were saying we maybe need a couple of hours because there are tons of things we want to talk about. Our governments, are they really ready for this revolution? Because we tend to talk a lot about that, but are they really transforming their own governments, bringing them into more digital? And what is more important, are they really governing for we all, for the people, in the sense of, are they becoming their own gods? Are they kind of deciding how the world is going to be? But are they asking you? Is there a way of connecting with these governors and say, I would like my city to be this way or the other one? We will ask them about that, because probably they're playing a bit on that. They're trying and changing many of the revolutions on the cities. So they will be probably prepared. I think they're all prepared. I'm making it too long. So please, welcome in. Thank you very much. Thank you. Daniel Quintero, Major, thank you. Jeff Merritt, thank you very much. Emilia Saiz, thank you very much. And Richard Budel, thank you very much. Okay, great. Sit down, please. Thank you. Thank you very much. Happy to have this amazing session. Please. Thank you. So as I was saying, lots of things to discuss. We were discussing a bit before with Richard, with Jeff, and having lots of things on mind. And while preparing this session, which I think it's going to be the session of the day. I have to say that, it's my session, you know? I just got in love with this. Just while preparing this session, I discovered something, I learned something that I thought it was amazing, and I want to share it with all of you. In 1852, some years ago, let's say, a man called Elisha Otis, pay attention to the surname, invented the safety elevator, the elevator. At that moment, and that invention changed the cities forever. By creating that safety cap, elevators went from carrying freight to carrying people. And although that could sound like a huge change, a huge revolution, that was not the huge revolution only, not alone. There were many others. For example, the upper levels of buildings of the city changed. They used to be the cheapest places on the building because nobody wanted to walk that much, to become the expensive ones. And at the same time, the sky became the limit for the urban architecture. So sometimes little changes in the cities make big revolutions, and this is part of what I would like to share with our guests. According to United Nations, by 2050, 68%, nearly 70% of the global population will live in cities. Sometimes we want to kind of leave the city and go to the mountain, but the world is moving to the cities, and that's proved. And at that time, the world population is going to be expected to be 9.7 billion people. which is not bad. And the connected cities and connected communities will, of course, change the whole ecosystem, but especially the way of living, the way we live, we all live. Right now, we can realize, for example, how emerging technologies are changing the way we build and we organize cities. As far as now we know, for example, big data, we have artificial intelligence, sensors, everything is packed of sensors, and it will be even more, 5G. And all this should provide better conditions for living. So what we need to kind of analyze in this session is how this implementation can be installed, can be part of our lives in our cities in a fair way, in a fairly way, and how can this work? That's why I would love to analyze how can we transform for the people, but also with the people. That's why, as I was saying, it's a pleasure to have with us Mr. Daniel Quintero, the mayor of Medellin, recent elected. Congrats. We also have Mr. Jeb Merritt, head of IoT, Robotics, and Smart Cities at World Economic Forum, and with a lot of expertise and amazing experiences facing the transformation of the city of New York. There is one that I want to ask you about, the cabins, the payphones, and what you did there. I think it's amazing. We also have Miss Emilia Saiz, which is a pleasure having you here also. She is the Secretary General for the United Cities and Local Governments, representing nearly the whole world. Well, a lot, huge part of the cake. So we'll talk about that. And we also have Mr. Richard Budel. He's the Huawei CTO Government and Public Sector, so he can tell us how the deployment works. He also comes from the government, so from the public administration. So we've got both sides. We've got Jekyll and Hyde in one person, which is going to be great for that.
I prefer to think Beauty and the Beast.
Okay, Beauty and the Beast works perfect. And I have to say that he's passionate about places like Nairobi, like Bogota or Milano. He wants to retire there. These are things that probably are not relevant to you, but we had a coffee and I thought it was amazing. Okay, so now, and let's go back to the topic. I would like to ask you, for an initial first minute, what's your take on this, and how do you plan, how do you face this revolution on your areas, cities, regions, or from your organizations?
Well, thank you, Pipo. If I may, I would like to introduce a little bit my city. I just got elected 2 weeks ago. It's a quite strange position here because I cannot talk about what we did, but I can talk about what we have done in our city. Medellin is a city that was known as the most violent city in the world, and we now are one of the most social innovative cities in the world.
Absolutely.
We did that by investing on people, on education, and connecting people. And that's a special word that I want to use here, because what we did was we started using technologies like a cable transportation system to reach the people in neighborhoods that were completely unconnected, escalators, and other strategies to connect people. And now we are like one of the most innovative cities in the world, but we still have a lot of problems. I was elected because we still have a lot of problems.
Of course.
Poverty, inequality. We have problems with crime, a lot of problems with crime still. We have solved many of our problems, but we still have problems there. And what we have is the talent and, again, the people to start doing the transformation that we're going to do in the next 4 years. Our terms are for 4 years. What we're going to do is we're going to we realize that the problems we have in our city, we will not find the solutions, all the solutions in New York or in Tel Aviv. We have to find our own solutions. So
absolutely.
What we're going to do is we're going to grow our ecosystem. We're going to open our government. We are going to open the problems of our government, so the ecosystem, the entrepreneurs, the academy, they will start solving problems, and we're going to create in these 4 years the data-driven company, public company, that is going to be under EPM. That is actually the second largest public company in Colombia. It's owned by Medellin. And so what we're going to do is we're going to open the problems of the city. We're gonna ask people, could you solve the problems of crime? So using Ruta N, then we're gonna use the driven data public company to support and to scale those entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want Medellin to become the software valley and a platform, a lab to solve problems for cities all around the world.
Okay, well, he says he's humble because he says he was recently elected. But to be honest, you've been working for the city for a long time. You've been Vice Minister of Digital Economy. You've been Vice Minister of Information and Communication Technologies. So many of the things that are happening
And actually, this is interesting because I was elected as an independent.
Yeah, I know that.
But also with a proposal of technology, where I feel is people is hopeless, is tired of politicians showing the same solution for the old problems. People want new solutions, and because they don't see solutions.
And we will talk about those new solutions and how this has to be made in tailoring every city or every region. Someone who can tell us also about that is Jeff Merritt, as we were saying. Jeff, what's your take on that, your initial take on that?
One, I'm thrilled to have mayors like this who I think represent sort of the new face of public leadership, and one that is incredibly collaborative, right? It's refreshing to hear sort of that recognition that it has to be, that we have to work together with the public, the private sector, government all together. These are massive challenges. I think that, you know, when I think about a session like this, I think it's important that we are, you know, cautious optimists.
Absolutely.
You know, you can have a title like this, the transformative power, and we have to remember that, yes, you know, the elevator and technologies like this can cause great opportunity, but if they're not carefully managed and regulated, that transformation could be one that's much darker, right? And that, yes, we could be building this cities of dreams, but we could also be building a city that's full of nightmares. And so we have to be very careful about that technology is not the solution to all of our problems. It's this collaboration that we're going to make progress with, and technology could, if properly managed, be a really important means towards that end.
Fantastic, thank you, Jeff. Ms. Saiz, what's your take on this? Let's go on this first initial round.
Yeah, I was thinking a little bit, and I mean, it probably depends on which part of the world you are looking this from. From my experience, and I just come back from our World Congress in Durban, where we had many elected officials discussing the future, I don't have the feeling that they are leading their cities thinking about innovation. They are leading their cities trying to deal with the existing problems. Mm-hmm. And that is because people that live in cities, we like innovation, we communities, we citizens, but we don't like change. So actually, we keep trying to deal with some of the existing problems. And as a matter of fact, we were looking, for instance, to the future of mobility, but we spent over 1 hour of the 1.5-hour session talking about cars. Cars are not the future, but still that's what we are dealing with. And I think that's what elected mayors like Daniel here will need to face. And that is, yes, we need to look at the new technologies, at these new solutions. But the problems that we have now are so very urgent that we are not allowing ourselves to look into the future. And my hope is that we as citizens, that we as communities, we do give this mandate to think ahead. And in order to do that, we need to change the kind of governance we had. It needs to be much more collaborative. It needs to be about co-creation. And to us, that's the trick. That's what we need to make it.
We'll get on that. I think that's an important advice. Richard, what's your take on that?
Yes, thank you, Pipo. I work for a company whose motto is to bring digital to every person, home, and organization for a fully connected digital world. So technology is baked into everything that we do. And about 40% of our employees are engaged in R&D, so it's emerging technologies as well. But I had a little experience this morning in the hotel where a very modern hotel, it's been open for only 6 months, they had a motion detector in front of the sink. So when I wanted to wash my hands and I started moving, the water would start flowing. And unfortunately, it didn't work particularly well, and it made it extremely frustrating for me to try and shave or brush my teeth. And I think that's not particularly smart. Right? And I think it might be okay for us to envision a city in the future where everybody is hairy because they can't shave, but a city of the future where nobody brushes their teeth is probably a little bit less interesting. So it's not about the technology, it's about the way in which we actually implement it. And I think when we talk about local government, there's something really important there in what Arthur Clarke said about technology, when it's done properly, is indistinguishable from magic. And that's a very scary statement, because what we see in human nature is that when something is magical, we give a power to the magician. And the magician might not always be a good custodian of that power. They might not always deserve that power. And what I notice when we deal with a lot of our local government clients is they look to us to be the responsible custodian of the technology. And I think that's inverted. As somebody who comes from the public sector and as somebody who was responsible for spending taxpayer money, I firmly believe it's the city's responsibility to take that leadership role. But we also can't expect local governments to be experts in technology. And so, as we just said, talking about finding that balance and doing the co-creation is really important, because I think right now the balance is not necessarily equal. It's slanted in an inappropriate
So
way.
we all agree that this is about mindsets initially. Technology as a tool, not as a goal, definitely. Technology can make livable cities, or better livable or better cities, let's say. But when you were saying, and I get what Mr. Quintero was saying initially, smart cities need smart governments and need to revolutionize governments, right? Because are our governments governing this kind of revolution in a smart way? Are they actually doing it? Or we need new kind of people who change the whole thing?
I would say inspiring leadership, because we need change. And I was vice minister, you say, when you're going to change something, you have to make people feel uncomfortable. So you have to be a really good leader. You want to inspire, to make people share goals. So I was thinking, like 2 minutes ago, what makes a human intelligent? And what makes a human intelligent is the ability to share goals and to collaborate. Mm-hmm. So those tools are powerful to make us intelligent. So a smart city, for example, needs to strengthen the ability to share goals. Democracy is an opportunity to understand what are the shared goals of a society. And collaboration, technology could help us to collaborate even more. But to do those things, you need inspiring leadership. And probably that means new governments. I was, as I said, elected against traditional politicians that probably didn't understand what we're talking here, and what is IoT, or what is LoRa, or what is size low pond. So we are also a new generation. People is electing a new generation that has new ideas and is going to change cities in an incredible way.
And you said something crucial, key. Collaboration. And I think that Ms. Saiz and Mr. Merritt from World Economic Forum can tell us about this amazing alliance, the G20 Global Smart Cities Alliance on Technology Governance that you presented some time ago, and that's been working on these days here in Barcelona, that has also Ms. Saiz and the organization joining the whole thing. And this is a huge alliance representing many cities. Is that necessary to advance in a proper and smart way?
Absolutely. The transformation here is massive. I think that I really appreciate what Emilia said, because I don't think that most cities understand, if we're really going to do this transformation, what it means. It means that technology is no longer sort of something that sits over in a silo, but your technology strategy ends up becoming your city strategy. You have to rethink your education system. You have to rethink every element of the way in which a city functions. It's really disruptive. It's going to be really uncomfortable. It's going to cause a lot of pain in the years ahead. And the way in which we mitigate some of that risk, and the way in which we help prevent some harm, is by putting guardrails, right? That we need a set of policies that have to exist around the world. It's not good enough to have, some cities that have good protections for their residents and others who are essentially being reckless, right? Because there's a lot of criticism about this term smart cities, but in some ways what I like is that it forces us to acknowledge that there are dumb cities. And I think the dumbest cities, the worst thing a city can do is to roll out technology without those guardrails, without knowing what it's doing, and without being prepared, because they can actually cause more harm. They could shut down city operations if they're not careful. You can have economies collapse and people can die. And so what we are working to do is to take a lot of the really amazing efforts that are underway around the world, efforts like what Emilia is leading at United Cities and Local Government, as well as groups that are working on cybersecurity, like we heard earlier, privacy, inclusion, and to be able to take those good practices, and particularly those policies that we want to see in place at every city around the world, and to begin to build consensus. And that's why we're focusing on the G20 countries. Initially, it's not to say that we're not working with other countries. We're working very closely with Colombia and have a new center in Medellin. But if we can build alliance among countries like Russia, the US, the EU, then we have the potential to actually see real norms. And I think that there's some strong parallels here. If you look at the advent of the automobile and when that went mainstream, we have global norms that help us govern those vehicles. We have stop signs, we have driver's license, auto insurances that exist around the world, and we need to begin moving there. We just don't have decades to do this. We have to do it very quickly.
The question I was thinking now with Emilia, do these norms represent all of them? I mean, you represent many local and regional governments, and I was thinking on what Mr. Quintero was saying about we want to become smart, but our own way to be smart. Do the norms that you will kind of agree are good for everyone, can represent everyone? Is it a general pattern that can be working perfectly for everyone?
Well, look, if you think that only in 2015 we have been able to sign up or to define a global agenda for development that is universal, that includes the global north and the global south, well, we haven't been very smart, have we? So I think we need to challenge the concept of smart altogether, and we need to challenge the concept of technology. I think that both are being challenged in our streets every day, and are being challenged in the streets of Hong Kong, but also in the streets of Santiago de Chile, or in Lebanon, or in most places right now. People are starting to realize that what we have perceived as very progressive, very advanced societies have been the cause to a lot of sickness, to a lot of unhealthy ways of living, and quite frankly, a very unhappy way of living. Mm-hmm. Many of us live in places where we don't feel too happy because we do not feel safe, because we cannot achieve our dreams. And so the idea behind technology, and I think that our collaboration is trying to strive towards a new notion of technology, it might not be high tech, it might be very low tech, and that is also technology. And the difference between the elevator example that you put and our days is that nowadays the highest technology is probably a soft manner in which we can connect all together, and just by a simple WhatsApp we just gather in a place and strive towards a demand or whatever. So I think that is what is being challenged right now, and many of the traditionally smart cities in the global north are being proven to be pretty dumb and need to follow the rules of the global south. The only way that you can do this, and I very much agree with Daniel, you need to put our heads together, and you need to make sure that the thinking takes place at the local level. I was this morning in a very, very tiny meeting with the chief resilience officers, and the chief resilience officer of Amsterdam was saying, we were thinking whether it is possible to be an Amsterdamer, to be from Amsterdam, somewhere else in the world. And what do you think the answer was? It is possible. That's the conclusion that they came to. So actually, we can have a lot of flexibility in how we look at things. It's about identity, and it's about owning the transformation. It's about transforming and not changing. It's about that type of technology, and I think that some of the solutions that we are starting to look at right now, certainly with our coalition, they need to allow us to do that. Changing the conversation with private sector is critical. I could not agree with you more, Richard. We need to know how we need to live and how we can sustain this planet. And in order to do that, we cannot be perceived as buyers of applications, but actually as designers of applications. And we need to do that together.
And which is the role for the technology companies, the private companies? We'll talk afterwards, and how do we need to merge both sides, private and public. But what's your take on that, Richard?
Yeah, but if I could just comment on one thing. When we talk about the role of technology in smart, one of the things that we've done for Western Europe is we've created a definition of smart city that doesn't include the word technology. I think if we presuppose that technology has to be a part of being smart, we've immediately excluded an entire realm of possible solutions. And I don't think technology is so special that it deserves to be accorded this special status, that it must be a defining characteristic. But I think part of what you said right at the very beginning there, Pipo, is important. When we talk about the governing, one of the things that I observed a number of years ago was that governance really has to have two components. One part of governance is controllership. And governments tend to do that exceptionally well. In fact, they tend to do that too well. But the other half of governance is leadership, right? So governments do controllership really well. It's on the leadership side that I think we have a bit of an issue. And 3 or 4 years ago, I might have said that that's an area where government actually doesn't really play a role. That's certainly changed in the last number of years. I think to your question then about what is the role of the IT providers, the technology companies, I think there are two things. The first is that we need to make sure that we are partners with the cities. I think trying to find ways of breaking down that traditional vendor-customer relationship are critical because it sets expectations that are then self-fulfilling. And I think we need to take a role in being more assistive, right? Playing more of a trusted advisor role, which is difficult to do in a commercial world because you always have the desire to sell your technology as well. So we need to find a better way of managing that.
But that's where, you know, this is why sometimes I describe this to the mayors that I work with is there are conversations which are so difficult to hold in a domestic space that you need to have that kind of conversations for transformations somewhere else. This is where the coalition comes in. This is what broader collaborations come in. You need to have specific discussions as client and provider. It's unavoidable. You need to have those. But transformation probably shouldn't come from there. It needs to be a broader discussion. This is what we are doing here. And I don't think that is happening at the speed or the quality that we need. Because the domestics and the concrete things are taken over in those discussions. Okay. So hopefully that's what we are learning now.
And at the same time that you say that, and we talk about alliances, about talking all together, we need to think that we still have half of the world, nearly half of the world, disconnected.
Yeah.
So how can we make this evolution in a proper way, in a right way, respecting those people that are not even connected, while some others create the other world? How can we look for the people and with the people if some of them are not connected? Are we really driving this in so difficult speeds that make it really hard? I don't know which of you want to go with it.
Well, as Vice Minister, we try to connect the whole country. For example, when we started in the government, in the past government, almost half of the country was completely unconnected, and we started working on it. I think when you connect someone, I start my conversation at the beginning talking about the power of connecting people. When you connect people, you believe on people. So we have to do everything is possible to connect people. And sometimes it's not about technology, as Emilia said. Sometimes it's about building roads.
Yeah.
In some cases, it's not just 5G. Sometimes it's even in urban areas. We have a lot of segregation, and sometimes we are not measuring that. How much person really connects with other persons in the same city. So definitely connections is very, very important.
Jeff, what's your take from World Economic Forum? I'm sure you've been...
Well, I was actually going to speak from my old hat from sort of the city of New York and what we did there. And I think that if, like, we can go and we can talk about sort of internet connectivity and, you know, how we did a big project in New York to provide, you know, free gigabit Wi-Fi for all the 5 boroughs. I think the most important part of that effort was to be able to take a holistic view and solve a problem, which is that, yes, we have a lot of, when we have massive areas, massive cities, we have a lot of folks that we have to connect together, and that we have to figure out how to do that in a sustainable way, and we have to figure out the underlying business models. And that, you know, Richard had meant, you probably didn't mean it, but you sort of said in your intro something about how you spend taxpayer dollars, and I think that we have to think about another role for companies when they're working with cities, that it's not only about contracting, it's not just about like cities see a need and then they pay a company to do it, but the city can provide an asset, the physical real estate, right? And so that's what we did in New York, is that we basically said, okay, we've got a lot of physical real estate that companies, you know, including, you know, folks like Intersection and Qualcomm, you know, have products that could use that real estate that could provide value and specifically provide internet access. So let's figure out a way to make it work where the companies can make the investment, and a massive investment, you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars that they can invest, that we can have the business districts where there's a clear sort of revenue opportunity, for example, through digital advertising, have those subsidized deployments in the residential areas. Take this holistic view and say, okay, how can you make an investment, get a return on investment there, provide quality of life impact, and at the end of the day, not distract the city from its problems that it has that are real in terms of public safety and health and schooling. And an initiative like that ends up generating over $200 million US for the city over its duration. So it actually adds to the revenue base. It's a win-win scenario, and I think taking that holistic view where you sit down, public sector, private sector, say, what's the problem? Is there any way we can find a financially sustainable way to do it?
Yeah, Emilia, one second. I wanted to ask Jeff just one thing, because probably the audience is not aware, or some of you maybe are, but I think it's interesting to explain that case that you were pointing out. What you did when you were facing the city of New York revolution in digital was, and probably every one of you thought on that, except if you're in London and you see that beautiful cabins, the payphones. But how many of you call from the street, from a payphone, from a cabin? Anyone? Probably not. So this man, when he was there, he said, what do we do with all this? I think there were 10,000. And you said, what do we do with this? And the solution that you brought, I think it's amazing. And as you say, it's a win-win. Can you explain a bit, just quickly, how the whole thing worked, and what do you offer now for everyone who does not have connection or signal or whatever?
Yeah, I'm going to explain the business model, because I think too often you see all these products out there and no one's telling you what the business model is. If you don't have a sustainable business model, it's all
we want that $500 million coming back to the city for 12 years.
If you think about, just take cities, and let's say your city still has payphones, you've got probably like print advertising on there. Print advertising is so inefficient, right? It basically leads to a scenario where you have a bunch of big multinational corporations that do bulk ad buys, because there's no efficient way to do sort of for individual small businesses to print and buy ads like that. And so if you're able to transform that print ad into a digital ad, you see a dramatic increase in both revenue, because you can just diversify the space, but also you open up the advertising market so that an individual business can actually do geographically specific advertising, time sensitive, so you can actually have a local restaurant advertise their happy hour right on their corner, right? So you diversify the ad space, you bring in more revenue, and therefore you don't need as much ad space.
You're doing exactly the same that the internet does with programmatic
You
ads.
just take the
You're announcing something which is cheaper than announcing it to everyone, and apart from that, many of you will not be interested.
So you decrease the amount of advertising on city streets, you open up that space to smaller businesses, you bring in revenue, and then that powers access to the internet, so you can actually provide free gigabit speed internet to New Yorkers, so they don't have to use their data plan, so they don't have to have an extra stress.
With the benefit for the people. Emilia,
I wanted to bring the conversation back a little bit to the commons. For a very long time, we have been thinking that we could solve everything with private solutions, and that being connected, so that the whole world could be connected privately, and we still measure how people are connected by the number of connections that everybody has in their own home. Quite frankly, by now, with the floods that we are having, with the climate change that we are experiencing, we should know by now that we should be thinking about these type of solutions in a different way, that they need to be collective solutions, that nobody has been taking care of the commons, and that public service provision delivered at local level is key to do this. And so I very much agree as well with the approach of mayors that think, look, sometimes being connected is something very simple. It's maybe opening up a community center where people can go and connect. When I started working with municipalities over 20 years ago, the Europeans were still using the fax, while all of our Global South members were starting to use internet, their Hotmail accounts and their Yahoos and etc. And then came Gmail, because for them it was much more easy, while for the Europeans they didn't mind paying that much money with faxing. So I think we need to go back to these commons, service provision, and service provision needs to play a different space, needs to have a different space in both policy making and technology development. And there is where you will see the real transformation, if you start to look at it from that perspective. Too often we see that the tech-based solutions, and I very much agree, technology is not always part of smart, they are approached from a very private ownership kind of space, and having one of these, all of us. And maybe that's not the way that we should think about it, and I think that the biggest part of the world in the Global South needs to show us alternatives, because the data that the community has and the intelligence of communities in the Global South can be a very important part of new solutions towards transformation.
I don't want to get like far from the people, with the focus on the people, but regarding to what you were saying, Richard, how can we be sure that even private companies are putting the citizens on the center? That's something that we should all ask to our administrations. But about private companies, how can we be sure that they're playing in a fair way and having the citizens at the core of those decision-making processes?
Is that the private sector's responsibility? I'm not sure that it is.
I think it's a shared one,
right?
Right?
It's a shared responsibility.
It's a shared responsibility that leaders like him need to inspire, like he was saying.
Yes, and I think what we can do is help by making the business models, we can help by making the technology more accessible, we can democratize it, being more transparent in the way that things are being done. And I don't want to lose that point that Emilia made about the fact that, you know, if 30% of the world is not connected, Huawei is very happy to help out with that. We have a solution. But the reality is, again, we're then presupposing that digital should be the only way that we interact with government. And we shouldn't lose track of the fact that we actually do live in an analog world. Yes, we are digitizing it, we are instrumenting it, but we still live in an analog world. And I think we want to get to a point where everybody has the ability to be connected. But to suggest that they must be connected is perhaps a step I'm not entirely comfortable with. And so I think what we can do is provide the options to the cities and make it easier. And I think we need to make sure that we're not being pushed back into those vendor-client relationships, which, to be honest, most procurement departments feel most comfortable with, but then start moving towards more of that partnership. Say, here is the problem, let's come up with a joint solution to the problem, and then figure out how we procure it, as opposed to saying, here's our procurement method, let's figure out how we work a solution through that.
Mr. Quintero, I was thinking on that. You talked deeply on how important it is to have your population, your people, your citizens connected. Once you have them connected, something that I presume it's really important, it's to listen to them. How do you, in Medellin, are planning, or you already did, listen to them? I've heard about a couple of amazing apps to denounce situations, to know about the air pollution. Explain us a bit about how do you listen to them, also when creating a new plan, which is what you have to do for the next 4 years.
There are different ways to connect with people. Like, I want, for example, my secretaries to be on the streets talking with the people. Technology is able to do that too. But I want for a little bit to talk about the importance of open the government to, not just to vendors, but to the people, to the ecosystem, because this is another way to listen.
Of course.
So government has to stop thinking, and even politicians, that we have the solutions. Mm-hmm. No, we don't have the solutions. The ecosystem have the solution. That includes definitely vendors, but it's not just that. I would like to have vendors that has open platforms that let entrepreneurs and innovators to work with them and to create new solutions that could probably work not just for Medellin, but for Santiago de Chile or Ciudad de Mexico. What we see all the time is vendors that just offer the solution, but they don't go a little bit further and say, and I would like to work with your ecosystem. I would like more of that. I would like more vendors saying, okay, this is our solution, this is our mesh that we're going to create in the city, and we want to help your ecosystem to grow. That would be wonderful. We want to be a player in the fourth revolution. We want to be the software valley, so I would like to see more vendors and more people saying, okay, we want to help on that.
I was thinking with Emilia, I don't know why I made this connection, so sorry before. Emilia grew in Cantabria, north of Spain, I think in a small village with 100 people.
Less than 100.
Less than 100 people,
yeah.
So listening to each other. And when we just exchanged some emails these previous days, she insisted a lot on listening to the people and on the social contracts. I don't know why I connected your childhood, but I think it's relevant the way we connect with our neighbors, the way we say good morning, and we know everyone we say. And we maybe need to recover that even in the connected world, because it looks like the connected world is the less connected world ever. So tell me about that social contract and the importance of listening to people.
I mean, I often say, I mean, we all do realize here that there is a very big part of the world that is not connected. However, even those parts of the world that we consider not connected feel very much connected. Mm-hmm. And they are looking at what is happening around as part of their own world. So citizens, nowadays, they feel very much global citizens. The limitation is the way that our formal systems, our legal frameworks are organized. Our legal frameworks, our governance systems are very, very old, very outdated. They come from a perception of law-making and state-making, which is from the Roman times, actually. And so when we talk about a new social contract, it's a new social contract that looks at trans-border relationship, a new type of solidarity and decision-making that goes beyond state relations, a type of diplomacy that is transformative and does not only sit together to address crises, and building from the local perspective a new type of citizenship. Because in fact, if we are all able to order from these big international platforms whatever product we want and to have it delivered also somewhere close to Mombasa, why wouldn't we be able to also request the same type of inputs in our decision making? So yes, I think I have been very influenced by growing up in a small place like that felt that their ecosystem, our ecosystem was very touched when we decided to be part of the European Union, the European community back then, because my dad was not able to sell the milk anymore at the price that he had.
I remember, and you explained in some interview that made you understand that things are not only governed locally.
Exactly. So those connections are the ones that we need to develop now, and I think that the basis that we have in the concept around Agenda 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the agreements around Paris are very good basis to develop this new social contract that will be beyond borders and that will be beyond citizenship as we know it nowadays. And I think technologies, the smart technologies, can be very helpful.
And going to two quick questions to Richard first and afterwards to Mr. Quintero. As a provider, as a private company, I suppose that it's clear that there is not one type of smart solution, not one type of smart city. Every culture, as you were saying, everyone needs to redefine or define which type of smart wants to be or needs to be for the people. What are you facing on that sense?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm a very proud Amsterdammer, but I've only spent 10 years of my adult life living in Amsterdam, and I've had the fortune of moving around an awful lot. And I don't want to go back to Nairobi and feel that it is now the same as Amsterdam because they're both smart, or to then go to Moscow or then go to Washington, D.C. and have heterogeneous, homogeneous types of cities. We don't want that. Everybody comes from a city and everybody has pride in their city, and every city is different and unique in a whole bunch of weird and wonderful ways. And what we're trying to do in Huawei is make sure that we're providing that service delivery platform that magnifies and amplifies those local characteristics that each city wants to have. We don't want to lose that variety. And one of the things that came out very clearly for me this week, something that had not been driven home as much before, is that we really need to think about making each city more unique while at the same time trying to make them uniformly smart as well. And that's part of the role of the public sector, or the private sector, is to provide those tools, provide those delivery platforms that allow for that local tailoring and the local flavor.
And again, just going flash and forward with some personal stories, I know that the major, when he was a young kid, he was using a computer, a personal computer that your mom gave to you, and you worked with it, you learned a bit on coding. Some people say that because of the way you learned to use computer and all that, you became pretty skillful at social networks, and that helped you to connect with your people. And probably many people say that the way you connected, on a real way, on a transparent way, made you to become the new major in the sense of these guys are going to listen to us. And because you're going to listen to us and probably you've been doing it and you are doing it, which type of smart solution, smart city, smart Medellin do you imagine, or not even smart yet? What do you imagine for the next years? What are you drawing?
Well, definitely I was selected especially because the young people, because they are the most connected. It was supposed, in Colombia, people thought that young people don't vote, and we proved they were wrong. Young people vote, and they actually elect me.
When they feel moved to. When they feel moved to.
So social networks are important, but not everyone is there, definitely.
Of course.
I want to think in Medellin as a platform, as a network in which entrepreneurs can start even developing those strategies, those applications that allows people to connect. There are another solutions that are even simpler or cheaper. For example, to make the city smarter and actually can pay by itself. Today in Medellin we have 100,000 lighting that are the old ones, that are the expensive ones. So we're going to change that for LED, and then so we're going to create a mesh there for the whole city. So the idea is that entrepreneurs can actually connect all the systems, change the meters, the electricity meters and the water meters. But we want to do look for part of the solution by ourselves. So we want the grid, we want the integrators, but then we want the people from Medellin to start creating their own solution. Probably some of them to connect with the government.
Good.
And for transparency, for example.
Yeah, that's another important thing, trust, transparency, how to reach that with your communities. I still want to go on the private and public merge. How does it have to work, if with sandboxes or digital twins, how to try to prevent so that you control the situation. But before that, and thinking on what you were just pointing out, solutions. This session was more about this power of the emerging technology. So just to have a quick, I don't know, just to see some of the solutions that we've found. I was listening yesterday an information from a private company in Barcelona foundation, saying that I think it was around Spain or Catalonia, but it doesn't matter because it's just the same. Everyone here spends around 2 full days a year in the car. That means basically the time that we just lose on commuting and all that. And Jeff, and I was thinking on that, can prove that smart cities in a safe and intelligent way can be catalysts for better health. If we talk about air pollution, for example, you've got an app, Ciota, which is for controlling the air pollution in Medellin. So you improved the transportation with GPS, public transportation, buses with the traffic lights, with everything, and that improved in the sense of people spend less time in the street, so less pollution, so easy parking, less everything, and happier people. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I think cars are a good example of where a technology can sort of lead to unintended harm and consequences, right? That, you know, when the car was invented, right, it just dramatically transformed cities and enabled you to move people and goods all across the city very rapidly and opened up access to all types of new offerings and quality of life improvements. And then you sort of look what's happened over time, and we've increased the number of vehicles again and again as cars became affordable. And then with the introduction of all the car sharing apps like Uber and Lyft, what you saw is that actually we made it cheaper and easier to take cars, and therefore we flooded our streets and we almost shut them down. They became, you know, the number of single occupancy vehicles in cities like New York just went through the roof. And so we have to figure out how do we sort of counter that, and sort of one of the ways that we were doing this in New York is to try and make sure that there's a real clear incentive to take public transportation. Because we know that there's a lot of benefits. If we can get rid of single occupancy vehicles and have shared transportation, we decrease the amount of congestion, we decrease the amount of pollution and greenhouse gases. And so what we did is to say, okay, let's think strategically. How do we get our buses, in particular, from point A to point B faster? And one of the ways that you can do that is, as cities moved all of their traffic signals to being wireless, so you can control a traffic light remotely. If you can connect that to the location of your buses by putting a GPS or location sensor on all your buses, the bus talks to the traffic light. You can enable that light to turn from red to green or stay green a little longer. You expedite the buses. And so what we were able to do is we saw on these bus lines that had this technology enabled, 20% reduction in commuting times. And so then it becomes a very simple choice for the public. If I take the bus, I can actually get to work faster than calling an Uber or a Lyft. And the benefit for the public at the end of the day is that we have, you know, less congestion and that we have less pollution.
Definitely. I just saw that we've got 3 minutes left, and I would like to, and I don't want to be the only one who asks. I understand that there are lots of interesting things. I'm going to try to kidnap these people for a couple of hours afterwards, but if any of you, we've got someone who wants to ask from there, please.
Hello.
Hello.
Good afternoon. This is a question for the panel. For cities to become smart cities, do you think global standards should be applied, which will help to save the cultural differences, or is better to create local standards, which will then create two-speed smart cities in terms of global and local? And the second question is, how local budgets can impact how fast and how better a city can become a smart city, and what solutions do you see to solve that?
We need more than 2 minutes for that.
Yeah, I know.
I would say.
And I asked for 1 question, not for 2, but well, let's try to do our best.
Well, let me kick off with the question on the law. as a lawyer by background, I tend to think that law always follows reality. And that I do think we need to legislate, yes, of course, but the main thing is to actually communicate with each other. And some of the high tech that we have been using to communicate with each other, to do consultations, public consultations, for instance, are not really working. I was talking to the mayor of Subang this morning, and she was saying when people are talking online, they are very rude. They are much more rude than when you see them. I think there is a combination that we need to do, and we need to learn the balance between this. And I do think that we need to do legislation, that local legislation is extremely important to shape the identity of the city and the belonging, but that at the end of the day, it is that local legislation that will need to define the way that our world is governed. That's how I perceive it.
Anyone wants to go with a second?
I'll just say yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm going to, just as I've been talking about cars, I'll keep on that. You take something like a speed limit, right? That there's a global recognition that cars go faster, they can cause more harm. So we've been able to harmonize at a global level and say, yes, there should be speed limits, but we give localities the ability to say what they think the speed limit should be. So we've got to align at a global level, but we've got to allow that flexibility and the ability to change and evolve over time as realities shift.
Well, it's been a pleasure to have you all here, but especially to have you all here. I was writing down some of the things that you said. I could have been writing down the whole hour, but there were some insights that I thought were interesting to just have on mind. Transforming does not mean changing in the sense of the soul. Let's say you need to be careful. This is not about technology, of course. Tech is not the solution. It depends also in the area. You need to redefine or define how you want to be smart, but not everything has to be applied to your area. When you connect people, you believe in people. I thought that was really powerful and inspiring. And government does not have the solution. It needs to listen to everyone. And what you said, just get down to the street and listen to the people. That will probably be the easiest way and more direct, and you don't even need internet for that. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure to have Mr. Daniel Quintero, Mayor of Medellin. Thank you very much. Mr. Jeff Merritt, Head of IoT, Robotics and Smart Cities at the World Economic Forum. Ms. Emilia Saiz, she is the Secretary General for the United States and Local Governments, and Mr. Richard Budel, the Huawei CTO, Government and Public Sector. Thank you very much all. It was a pleasure. Thank you. Gracias.